Victorian London, a city that once grew to be the largest city in the world, that was the heart of international finance and trade. In fiction, Victorian London is often envisioned as a place where rain and fog enveloped the city almost constantly, where you would often hear the sounds of train whistles and horse-drawn carriages on cobblestone streets. The perfect setting for a story of terror, mystery, and intrigue. The city had many to offer, the least of which is the very famous case of Jack the Ripper. During this time in London, it was also common to hear of ghosts haunting the streets, pale, human-like figures that preyed on lone pedestrians walking home late at night. One of these was a figure that would come to be known as Spring-Heeled Jack. It all began with a scream. In October 1837, a young woman named Mary Stevens was making her way to Lavender Hill, where she worked as a servant. She had been visiting her parents in Battersea and was now walking home alone through Clapham Common. It was late in the evening, so it had grown dark. Moving through the dark alley, she was suddenly confronted by a shadowy figure emerging from the alley. This figure grabbed her and held her in a vice-like grip before it started kissing her face. It tore at her clothes, slashed her skin with claws that she would later describe as cold and clammy, almost like a corpse. Terrified, Mary struggled to get free, and she screamed. This drew the attention of nearby residents who quickly rushed to the area. This commotion made her attacker release her and quickly flee the scene. He leapt back to the building he had originally come from with an ease that did not seem human. Soon, more people would arrive, and immediately a search began for this aggressor. But he was nowhere to be found. He had simply disappeared into the night. It wouldn't be long before Jack was seen again. The very next day, a man resembling Mary's attacker was reportedly seen near her residence, though supposedly he was after another victim, and not Mary. This man would quickly flee when a passing carriage came a bit too close. This man would run out in front of the carriage, spooking the horse, causing the driver to lose control. The carriage would end up crashing and injuring the driver. Not sure about the horse. According to witnesses who saw this commotion, this man or creature then escaped by jumping over a 2.7 meter high wall with ease, and the only sounds that were heard as he fled was the cackling of a high-pitched laugh. Following these incidents, reports of similar encounters began to spread like wildfire. Several young women throughout suburban London reported similar sightings. The press would report on many of these sightings, and the attacker would eventually be given the nickname Spring-Heeled Jack. Each account introduced new elements to this story, making it more and more fantastical. Jack would develop the ability to shapeshift. He could leap over rooftops with ease. He had an ability to breathe fire with blue flames that flickered from his mouth, and he had a ghostly appearance with gloves in the shape of claws. But despite all the whispers and rumors, most people living in the city would dismiss this whole thing as exaggerated gossip or even yet another ghost story. That would be until another scream was heard. On the 19th of February 1838, 18-year-old Jane Alsop answered a knock on the door at her father's estate. It was late in the evening and they were not expecting any company. On the other side of the door was a man wearing a cloak. He told Jane that he was a police officer, and he asked her to bring a light as they had caught Spring-Heeled Jack right there in the lane. Jane would then go to get a candle, and she stepped outside to give it to the policeman. As soon as she handed him the candle, he threw off the cloak and revealed a hideous appearance with eyes glowing like red balls of fire and a mouth that vomited blue and white flame. He supposedly wore a large helmet and a tight white costume that resembled white oilskin. Without saying a word, this man grabbed Jane and began tearing at her gown with his claws, which felt like metal. Jane screamed for help. She struggled out of his grip and ran back to the house. The man chased after her, catching up with her on the steps where he clawed at her neck and her arms. The commotion outside had drawn the attention of one of her sisters, who came running to help. The arrival of her sister was enough to make this attacker back off. The women then ran back inside the house and secured the door. Once safely inside, they heard a knock on the door again, but this time they ignored it, and eventually whoever was on the other side left. Then, on 28th of February 1838, a young woman named Lucy Scales was walking through Green Dragon Alley, Narrow Street, Limehouse. She and her sister were returning home after visiting their brother, who was a butcher who lived in a respectable part of Limehouse. Walking through the alley, they noticed a person that was standing in the passageway. He was tall, thin, covered in a large cloak and carrying a bullseye lantern, similar to the one that the police would use. When Lucy and her sister drew nearer, the man spat blue flames into her face. This temporarily blinded Lucy and she dropped to the ground, seizing with violent fits of hysteria, which lasted for hours after this attack. This story would later be corroborated by their brother, as he would report that he had heard one of his sisters screaming only moments after they had left his house. Running outside, he found Lucy on the ground in a fit with her sister trying to support her. The man, the attacker, did not speak or make any attempt to grab these two women. Instead, he just walked away after blowing fire in Lucy's face. The fear of spring-heeled Jack became so palpable that the government had taken action. On the 9th of January 1838, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir John Cowan, publicly revealed that he had received complaints from several parts of London. And from the complaints he had received, he deduced that the story had become widespread in suburban London. Despite being very skeptical, the numerous complaints still led to the Lord Mayor deciding to look into this case. A big reason for that was allegedly someone he trusted had told him of a servant girl at Forest Hill who had been scared into fits by a figure wearing bearskin. Confident that they would soon get to the bottom of this whole thing, inquiries were launched and police patrols were increased in areas where Jack was reported to roam. Even the Duke of Wellington would go out armed on horseback to hunt and kill this monster, despite being in his late 60s at the time. In the case of Lucy Scales, several men was brought in for questioning, but all of them were set free. In the case of Jane Alsop, shortly after the attack on her, a man named Thomas Milbank had boasted in a pub called Morgan's Arms that he was Spring-Heeled Jack. Once this news reached the authorities, Milbank would be arrested. Supposedly, at the time of his arrest, Milbank had been wearing white overalls. A greatcoat and a candle were also found outside the Alsop house, and the coat was said to belong to Milbank, though the source for this is unclear. What is clear though is that Milbank was tried at Lambeth Street Court and he only escaped conviction because Jane Alsop insisted that her attacker could breathe fire, which Milbank said he could not do. Despite these efforts to catch him, Spring-Heeled Jack remained elusive and over the years he became a bogeyman in London. Children were warned about staying out too late, that the leaping figure would snatch them from the safety of the streets if they did. For many growing up in the city, Spring Hill Jack became something of a rite of passage, which amplified the legend. As the years wore on, sightings would continue, each more bizarre than the last. The legend would grow so much that it even spread outside of London. In the 14th of April 1838 edition of the Times, there was an article about a gardener in Rosehill, Sussex, who had been terrified by a creature of unknown nature. In August 1877, soldiers stationed at the Aldershot garrison would also file a report mentioning Spring Hill Jack. According to the report, a sentry on duty at the North Camp noticed a figure advancing towards him. When challenged, this figure did not respond nor react. It kept moving towards this soldier until it was right beside him, where it then moved very quickly and slapped the soldier in the face several times, which led to shots being fired at this figure with no visible effect. Though this part has been argued in several sources. Some claim that the soldier was firing blanks, others claim that he simply missed or fired warning shots. Either way, these bullets had no effect, and this strange figure would then vanish into the surrounding darkness. Another account of Jack's appearances at Aldershot came from 1922 memoir by Lord Ernest Hamilton called 40 Years On. He wrote that this appearance of the figure occurred in the winter of 1879 after his regiment, the 60th Rifles, had moved to Aldershot. And he also wrote that similar appearances had supposedly also occurred when the regiment was barracked at Colchester in the winter of 1878. These appearances supposedly caused such unrest among the soldiers that sentries were ordered to shoot on sight, which led to a decrease in appearances until they eventually stopped completely. Hamilton would speculate that this whole thing was nothing but a prank carried out by one of his fellow officers, though there's no evidence to back this up. While these reports of a night terror were attributed to Spring Hill Jack, the Aldershot garrison reportedly has its own ghost. The now abandoned Cambridge Military Hospital is said to be haunted by a grey lady, a ghostly apparition often reported in old historic buildings, such as manor houses or hospitals. Stay tuned for a video on that. With the dawning of a new century, the allure of the legend would fade. The last reported sightings of Spring Hill Jack came from Liverpool in 1904. Far from fading into obscurity, the legend of Spring Hill Jack would find new life in fiction. Penny dreadfuls were cheap, popular serial literature produced during the 19th century in the United Kingdom. And it was here that Spring Hill Jack's role in the stories would change. Originally, he was cast as the villain, but that gradually turned into him playing the role of a costumed avenger of wrongs and protector of the innocent. Which means that Jack started as a creepy figure haunting the streets of London, but he ended up becoming a precursor to pulp fiction and the comic book superheroes that we know today. As the residents of London tried to make sense of what and who Jack was, theories emerged, as they always do. Some suggested that he truly was a supernatural being, a demon, perhaps one summoned into this world by practitioners of the occult, or one that manifested simply to create turmoil. More modern theories suggest that Jack could have been an extraterrestrial entity with a non-human appearance and features like superhuman agility deriving from a life on a high-gravity world, an alien, or maybe even a time traveler from another dimension. There's also a theory that suggests that the attacker was an animal, specifically a kangaroo. that had been brought from Australia and had escaped into the streets of London. But obviously, the most common theory is that Jack was human, perhaps a skilled acrobat or an athlete, someone playing a prank, or a criminal who intended to cause harm to his victims. Which, considering that the majority of the victims were women who were attacked after dark, is unfortunately very easy to believe. Another theory suggests that Jack was not one person, rather he was a group of people, a gang of criminals that intentionally created the legend of Spring Heel Jack by working together, all wearing a black cloak and jumping across rooftops, all done in order to pull off other crimes without being caught. The most common crime in Victorian London was theft. And if the police were distracted by panicked residents putting the blame on some kind of wraith hunting the rooftops, then would-be thieves would have a much easier time committing crimes. In fact, this theory was even proposed in one of the letters that were sent to the Lord Mayor at the time. That letter suggested that a group of young aristocrats had made an irresponsible wager about visiting many of the villages near London in 3 different disguises: a ghost, a bear, and a devil. A counter theory to that is that this wasn't an organized group at all. Rather, one individual would be responsible for the creation of the myth, which led to copycats. One or several men with a twisted sense of humor, or just plain evil. Thomas Milbank. It's possible that he was telling the truth, but it's also possible that he had nothing to do with the case, but he still would brag and spread lies for attention. One popular rumor circulating as early as the 1830s was that an Irish nobleman was Spring Heel Jack. He was notorious for drunken brawling, brutal jokes, and vandalism, and would often find himself talked about in the news during the late 1830s. According to rumors, he was willing to do anything for a bet. He also had strong contempt for women, which were well known throughout the city. All of these things would earn him the nickname, the Mad Marquess. It's speculated that an incident with a woman and a police officer was enough for him to develop the idea of Spring Heel Jack as a way of getting a revenge on both the police and women in general. The theory suggests that he, with the help of some friends, designed special spring-heeled boots and that he would practice fire-spitting techniques. Another point to strengthen this theory is that during one of the sightings, a servant boy would speak to a figure who had asked to speak to the master of the house. The boy would then turn to call his master, and as he did, he noticed that this figure was not human. The figure would then leap over the entire house, but before he did, the boy noticed that Jack had an embroidered coat of arms with a W, which definitely would be something that the Marquess would wear. The Marquess did seem like a likely culprit, as he was present in the London area at the time of the first Spring Heel Jack incidents took place. However, he can't be solely blamed for the sightings, as they continued long after his death in 1859. In the end, no one was ever caught or identified as Spring Heel Jack. It does seem like an urban legend that quickly spun out of control. It started as some creep assaulting a woman and grew into a creature that could jump over buildings and breathe fire thanks to retellings by panicked residents, and strangely enough, ending up as a hero protecting the innocent. A creep attacking women in alleys, to a supernatural monster, to a superhero. It is, unfortunately, very easy to believe that these women were attacked by someone in the night. It is something that would haunt London later with Jack the Ripper. And these terrified reports would then grow into a legend. And today, that is ultimately what the tale of Spring Heel Jack has become, a kind of blend of myth and reality.